But I think before we start, I would like to make sure that we all are aligned on what the definition is of drug repurposing and drug repositioning. So drug repurposing are FDA-approved drugs that will be used for new indications. Drug repositioning are drugs that are not yet approved, but that have a lot of potential and that are actually in the fridge of pharmaceutical companies that are shelved. This is what the two words you will be hearing this day, is repositioning and shelved assets. And our task this morning is, in the next 45 minutes, to solve the problem of how do we get these shelved assets out of the pharmaceutical companies in a way that everybody feels respected. But the quick thing is we will go from ID to I do during this panel, and we will come up with some very concrete action items. But the first thing I want to do is show you we can. And maybe that, I would like to first of all have every panelist maybe introduce themselves very quickly, and then I want to pass it over to my very best friend Freda to talk about we can. So maybe quickly an introduction and then we jump in.
Okay, when you get to be my age, it's hard to quickly introduce yourself. But I'm Freda Lewis-Hall. I am a psychiatrist by background and training. I've been a clinician, I've been in academic medicine and service at the National Institutes of Mental Health. In the last 30, I've served in the pharmaceutical industry, with my last role being the chief medical officer for over a decade at Pfizer.
Hi, I'm Andrew Lowe, professor of finance at the MIT Sloan School of Management. And for the last 15 years, we've been focusing on applying various concepts of financial economics to making biomedical innovation faster, cheaper, better.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanisha Carino. Good morning. Nice friends out there. I'm a visiting fellow at the Duke Margolis Institute for Health Policy, where my collaborator, Beth Boyer, who's here as well, and I are working on a series of research projects that I'll touch on as we go on. But really the body of our work is really around understanding what are the regulatory and the policy barriers, but also incentives and the role of government, and really scaling and making drug repurposing something that is much easier to do moving forward.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rena Conti. I am a health economist, and I'm an associate professor at Boston University, just down the road. I also co-direct the Technology Research and Policy Institute at the university. My research is largely on drug pricing, although I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about what gets companies and investors interested in innovating, and trying to ensure that incentives are set so that we get the drugs that we need and deserve. I'm delighted to be here.
Perfect. Freda, take it away. We can.
So I quote my husband a lot, and he always says, I have enough ideas, I need my doers. And I had been in the pharmaceutical industry for decades, and across many companies, large and small, and was agonized by the fact that so many potential treatments and cures were sitting in the basements of companies not to be moved forward. So these shelved assets were just agonizing to me. So in 2016, I had the opportunity to put a project forward at Pfizer. And that project included a consultant helping us think about, okay, what is in the basement, and why are the things that are still there? What is the archetype of what doesn't make it out? And then with that archetype in hand, we were able to create a scenario that Pfizer agreed to license several assets to a newly formed company that would then take those forward. And it was an exciting project, but a lot of work, and that's a learning we can talk about in a minute. But we had over 150 volunteers within Pfizer to help us do the assessments. Scientists who specialized in certain areas and certain type of molecular activity, financial leaders, business development leaders, you name it. It was an all hands on deck. But it was a lot of work, and these were not day jobs. These were literally night jobs for people who were helping to do this work, because their day job was on the prioritized products. Long story short, we were able to identify them, and we then went and raised over $100 million to start a small company. And that company would then receive the license for these assets. One of the assets was a MEK inhibitor that we believe showed some promise in neurofibromatosis 1. And it came into the portfolio of the new company, and ultimately on February the 11th of 2025, it was approved. So we know that it can be done, that we can do the assessment, that we can create a model and a receptacle, if you would, of a company or organization or institution that can move these forwards, and we can actually get them to patients. So I'd like to share some of the stories around that, because I think the barriers are something that we need to take a look at. But let's hear some of the other opportunities, and then we'll circle back on the challenges. But I'm sorry, can we celebrate the fact that we
Exactly.
got
Can
to
we have a round of applause for this? So this is exactly the we can why we are in a celebratory mood this morning. But I think one of the challenges that we had during our conversation and during our long-term collaboration with Freda and the team is that this is difficult to scale. Having to count on 150 volunteers constantly to make sure that we get these shelved assets out of pharmaceutical companies. So in order to make this a scalable and attractive model for other companies, we need to come up with something new. So we've had a couple of calls over the past couple of weeks with this esteemed panel, and we came up with a lot of ideas. So I don't know, Andrew, if you want to start. Tanisha, if you want to start to talk about your transparency idea.
Let Andrew start, because it's always about the money.
Well, you know, someone once said that to a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I'm guilty as charged. As a financial economist, I do focus on the money and the incentives. There's no doubt that a repositioning of drugs, it can be a very profitable activity. And a couple of the companies that I was involved in, BridgeBio Pharma and Roivant, have made their business models out of approaching academia and pharma in identifying these so-called shelved assets. The issue at heart, though, is that we're talking about values that are on the order of maybe $100 million, $500 million max. To big pharma, these kinds of assets would be considered failures. If you think about how much GLP-1 has made for Novo over the course of the last calendar year, 2024, anybody know what the revenues for GLP-1 was for Novo? $40 billion in 1 year. That's income. That's not NPV. And so for big pharma companies, their focus is on these big ticket blockbusters, not the repositioning assets that could generate a smaller, although quite attractive revenue stream for smaller, more nimble biotech companies. So one idea is to create a clearinghouse where we can provide an inventory of all of the shelved assets that big pharma doesn't want, doesn't need, is just gathering dust, and will be perfectly happy to license out and retain, a small percentage of the royalties in exchange for seeing one of their assets that's earning nothing turn into a $100 million a year revenue product. That's basically the business model of a number of the smaller, more nimble biotech companies, but you can't manage what you don't measure. And so the idea of building an industry utility, a clearinghouse that basically catalogs these shelved assets, it's not hard, and in my opinion, it's not that expensive, but I do think the private sector needs to be involved to provide that kind of economic incentive, rather than just relying on these incredible volunteers who are donating their time. But in addition to that effort, imagine if you had a sales force of people that were getting paid market wages to create and sell those kinds of repositioned assets. That would be a game changer.
I love the idea of a clearinghouse, and one of the things that I'll say is the work that we've done at Duke has spanned a few different areas. The first area we really looked at Duke was during the pandemic. That was an environment that was ripe for thinking about what can we actually use that's on the shelves today or even in the market to address the pandemic. And as we thought about it at Duke and the work that we did, having an organization or having a champion that is this clearinghouse to provide that leadership to match both people who have assets, who are developers, with the researchers with the need, with the money to get all the research done, is definitely one of the things we found. You know, the other thing that I would say in terms of doing is that we have an exciting opportunity ahead of us. You oftentimes don't hear this these days, but in terms of this particular administration, if you have been following the reports of the leaked reorganization structure at HHS, there's the intention of creating a new Assistant Secretary for Health that would have NCATS, it would have ARPA-H, and BARDA under one leadership structure. These are three agencies that have had long histories and interests in drug repurposing and really understanding how to create scale and exactly the areas of incentives, the data that Andrew's talking about. So from a policy and a political perspective, this may very well be an area that we can make advance and make traction in the next few years.
I think one of the challenges, though, that we have been encountering as a research foundation, so I'm the CEO of the Children's Tumor Foundation, and we have been looking for all kinds of assets. What is hard is that, where are they? Because you have to really be Sherlock Holmes to find the shelved assets, because you have to go in these Cortellis databases and then look at discontinued, and then you need to see if you can spy in to understand where these shelved assets are. So I think Tanisha, you were also mentioning that need for transparency. Can we figure out something that we know which assets are shelved without companies having to disclose their underwear, we have seen, right?
Yeah, but if I can add, I think that there is an excitement within companies, to Andrew's point, for finding a way, first of all, to serve patients, because the shelved assets are agonizing to most people at these companies, large and small, that really care about patients and want to do their absolute best at every moment. So I think that there are opportunities to do that. And NCATS is a great example. I had the honor of chairing the Cures Acceleration Network when the NCATS was formed in a decade or so ago. And we set up a clearinghouse, if you would, and companies willingly deposited the data around their shelved assets and added resources within the companies to help navigate those opportunities. So I think that if we had if we continue to have a place in an infrastructure that then worked on behalf of reaching out to companies, small, that for whom this might be, or investors who would be willing to start companies to do this, it can be a very meaningful opportunity. And can I add I'm probably the last person that should be talking about AI, because I actually can't even use my phone very well. But that said, there are a couple of really good examples of AI being deployed and trying to understand the vast pool of assets that are sitting in various places and figuring out where to put them. And there are a few examples of that. One that I've fallen in love with, there's another company that was started with assets from AstraZeneca. And at Conduit, we had the opportunity to engage with an AI firm, Sarborg, who is creating signatures of patients. So the heterogeneity of even a rare disease is quite stunning. So how do you get a very specific patient profile in the AI platform? And then how do you create specific profiles of the molecules that are sitting in these warehouses, if you would, and then do the matches so that you can get the greatest likelihood of technical success and clinical success when you pull them forward. So it's really an exciting opportunity if we can get enough of the data in place on both the patients and their characteristics and on these molecules that are sitting, so that we can make those matches and then put those matches in a clinical environment that they can be taken forward. And just to complement the AI opportunity to do this removing the human bias, if you would, or the interest bias of people that that work in this every day. So to not have a hypothesis for what these matches will be, but to just put the data in and torture it and let it confess, is, I think, an interesting opportunity for us to move forward.
I think the other big idea here is also about money, and specifically it's about insurance reimbursement and coverage for these products once we bring them to market. In my mind, there are really two types of products here. One that are novel, truly, they've just been shelved for whatever reason, and will enjoy patent protection and market exclusivities once they actually are brought to market. That assures innovators premium pricing post-approval. We still need to get insurers to cover and reimburse them, but at least you are assured a potential significant reward for bringing those products to market. The other types of products are those for which reimbursement and coverage, especially in the US and in the developed world, might be less assured, and or premium pricing based on patents or market exclusivities at this point in time are quite limited. You can think about this in the COVID context, where the UK researchers were investigating the repurposing of existing generic drugs for the treatment of COVID. In that second scenario, I suggest humbly a type of prize that would actually pull certain types of investment into the market, and could be based on the quality of the endpoints that are provided, or the target population that could really meet, where these products could really meet significant unmet need. COVID is a great example, but there are others. Currently, people have been talking about doing a prize for the development and repurposing of existing antibiotics. You could think about this for cancer, you could think about this for other things as well. It might require governments and philanthropies to get together, put together a list of significant unmet need for which repurposed, non-patentable assets would be important to meet societal goals, but it seems totally doable.
So I'd like to follow up on that, and also a question that you asked, Annette. So I agree wholeheartedly with Rena that having some kind of a prize or advanced market commitments or some kind of government collaboration would be ideal. The problem is that right now I don't see that happening anytime in the near future, and it's frustrating to me because time is passing, and I think there's a lot that we can do without having to ask for government intervention just yet. One question that you raised, and that was, where are we going to get these shelved assets? How do we identify them? And I agree that's a challenge, but let me give you a simple way to begin. Every single clinical trial that is conducted in the United States has to be registered with clinicaltrials.gov. So that is a database that everybody has access to. Why not search the database for all phase 1, phase 2 assets? That's a starting point for the drugs that are there that are not yet approved. So take a look at all the drugs that have passed phase 1 and that yet not yet approved. That is the initial starting point. And now with AI, you can identify a much more refined list. And from that point, that's where you need the private sector to put together an industry utility, hire a sales force, to approach all of the big pharma companies, ask them what they have available, ask them if they're willing to list their shelved assets on this repository. And in exchange, they'll obviously get royalties if one of these drugs gets repositioned. That's something that I think would require maybe $5 million to create a NewCo, adopt a drug as a company that will then be funded. And from that point forward, once an initial drug is licensed, that licensing fee alone will be enough to sustain adopt a drug from that point forward. It'll be a self-financing effort.
I mean, just building on the idea of transparency, which was the challenge that Annette threw out. Yes, we can look at clinical trials. I think another idea that's been thrown out is this idea of asking companies to just find ways of disclosing more in their disclosures. Every company at earnings has to revisit their 8Ks. We all end up looking at our assets. And if we're going to discontinue an asset and that's material to us, I mean, us being, I've been in and out of the pharmaceutical industry, so I still say us, then we disclose it. But the problem is, as patients, you have to track all these AKs for individual companies. So why not find ways that we, as the industry, can align on a uniform way of disclosures that are part of your SEC filings that make it a little bit easier for both investors who really want to understand what's in and out of company pipelines, but also the patient community who's looking at these trials they participated in and wanting to know what's next. And I think that is an area that there could be really great alignment between the industry and the patient community on how to just get that transparency in a regular way.
Well, I was actually going to say, I'm not as worried about the volunteering of the data. I think to Andrew's point, and to Tanisha's point, that once you get started with the database, and we saw this at NCATS, and then you have a success under your belt and then another one, again, the incentive is, I think, enough to push companies for the momentum. You don't need 10,000 to start with tomorrow. We can start with 1,000 or 100 actually, do the work on it, start to show that it works, and I feel very confident that there will be a line outside the door to make this happen on behalf of patients. When we add advocacy to that, so organizations that are working in specific disease areas and have a focus and an interest, knowledge, and a network, who might you bring to the table with this knowledge and information and willingness to participate? So I feel that one thing is, I don't know that we need 1,000 of them though. I mean, I don't think we need 1,000 of these organizations. I think Andrew's idea of, a come one, come all to this spot right here so that we can really leverage the idea that we have the data set, that we have volunteers who are interested in this, that we have companies that have come to the table to repeat this over and over, and to have, to be able to choose between a clearinghouse, I think becomes more problematic than having one that's starting small and then growing.
Yeah, and then maybe there, I'm going to pitch for including foundations. I see Ron is there, but I think we as research foundations have become way more sophisticated, if you want. There is a lot of pharma veterans on the research foundations now that have built infrastructures to then really make sure that once the asset's selected, that we can get that quickly through both preclinical and clinical, so that you create some kind of accelerator. So coupling this vault to accelerators that can really become an incentive for pharma, because they move fast. Because we know there was the Medicine Crest that they launched in the UK, there was the NCATS initiative. So there's a lot of companies that are interested in that, because in my humble mind, I think 99% of the people that work in healthcare want to do good for the patients. You always have the somewhere, but I'm convinced that 99%. If we can look at that energy and use that energy to really use it for something good, making patients better and creating treatments for patients, I think not only can we then, to your point, Freda, what you always said, we need to create a recycling model for drugs. It needs to be an automatism that once a drug has not been pursued by a company, that it automatically is pursued for any patient who can benefit from this drug. I think we have that ethical obligation as a community.
And I want to add the speed with which I met someone once who was complaining about the work in the pharmaceutical industry, and I explained it takes 12 years, it takes $2 billion, and the failure rate is very high. He looked at me and said, "Sounds like you all need to get better at what you do." And he's right? And I think that we're finding models that help us get better at what we do. So if you think about SpringWorks, the company that launched Gomekli, it is the second approval since 2017 when the company was founded. So imagine, we went from these stranded, shelved products in a company to 2 approvals in diseases that otherwise would not have had an intervention. in just this short period of time. So again, this is a model that if we could rinse and repeat, do it over and over and over again, we should be able to really make an impact on unmet medical need.
I have one funny problem though. So what we do see is that a lot of the major pharmaceutical companies are acquiring small biotechs with great molecules. Let's say they acquire the biotech for that one molecule they're actually interested in. But the biotech has, for example, 3 molecules. Those 2 get automatically shelved, right? Even if there is phase 1 data. The biotech company ceases to exist. The IND package can be at the FDA, but nobody can access that data. So how do we fix that conundrum?
Yeah.
That's a policy question.
Right, and I mean, I think there's also research that suggests that shelving is not only for financial reasons. They simply can't, right? There are also strategic reasons, potentially anti-competitive reasons why shelving is occurring after acquisition. Because of that, I think this forcing function of some disclosure, especially for assets pre-human testing, seems absolutely critical.
I think that if you haven't, so first of all, thank you all for being here, because as you can tell, all of us on this stage are true believers in this idea of drug repurposing. And one of the things I'll say is, this is not a new journey. We've been on this journey, many of you with us, for over a decade. There's a lot of learnings that we've learned through the years, and now a lot of success. But I think that at the very beginning, this is like any big movement, like you have to have champions. And for one thing, the FDA, and what can the FDA do, is actually a research question that we're trying to answer. So if you're curious about that, please join us on May 29th. We're actually hosting a workshop on what is the role of FDA in drug repositioning and drug repurposing. But what I'll say is every one of us needs to think about, like, who can I be in my organization? I've had the honor of working across every actor in the drug repurposing world. And within a company, you can be a champion for once you've tried to license out an asset and we can't find a partner, is there somebody in the organization that says, let's think about donation, let's think about drug repurposing? Can it just be part of what we do to sort of clean up the data rooms, like make sure like it's organized, and have somebody think about what's next when the traditional commercial pathways aren't available to you? And within research foundations, we all fund investigators and scientists. God bless. We still need to do that. But each one of you has the ability of thinking about drug repurposing as part of your core strategy. And so the more we can find champions in each of these organizations, in government, in research foundations, in the industry, that's what we're really going to need to make this work.
So can we go from ID to I do? We have 10 minutes and 41 seconds to come up with some very concrete, and then we hope that there are some champions in the room that will jump on and join our movement. So let's go from ID to I do. I go down the road. Freda.
I think that absolutely whatever we call it, right? The clearinghouse, the incubator, the accelerator. We need to start that in 10 minutes when we step down and start talking to people about the roles they can play, creating the infrastructure for it. And it can be an all hands on deck opportunity. So if I had to do one thing, it would be to meet you at the side of these stairs and kind of get your name and hear that you were ready to be a part of making this happen.
So I agree with Dr. Lewis-Hall that we just need to get started. And to me, the idea seems pretty straightforward because it's been done in many other industries in many different ways. But really, the idea can begin with any organization, including nonprofits, perhaps NORD, Bio, or any other nonprofit. Yes, it could. Would be able to create a core team of people that are interested in creating a for-profit company. For-profit because I do believe that this is a sustainable organization that will actually be quite profitable in terms of being able to provide that clearinghouse service and then earn a fee from the licensing of these assets, some of which could be quite valuable. So I think that there should be some enterprising people in this room that would be willing to do that, that would have the contacts in the pharma industry to be able to knock on doors after the initial analysis from clinicaltrials.gov. But if nobody's willing to do it, let me offer that at MIT we would be willing to start a clearinghouse to begin that process if we can get grant funding to be able to put it together. I don't believe that MIT is the right place for it or the best place for it. I think that the private sector should be where it is. But if nobody's willing to do it, certainly we're willing to step in and at least build the structure that we think is necessary, the data infrastructure, and then spin it out to a private sector company at the right time.
Can we leverage any of the work that was done at NCATS?
Absolutely. And also we can leverage what's happening right now at BU at the Needle, which is doing high throughput screening of compounds for anti-infective purposes. That technology exists, that infrastructure exists, and could be expanded with support.
And my I do moment is, I do believe that this is a moment from a policy perspective to frame drug repurposing as a core focus of what the new innovation center could do for the country, and to provide the scale, the funding, the incentives that could possibly fuel a lot of the private sector and nonprofit for efforts forward.
I think what I have seen, and as you probably know from my weird accent, I'm a European. So one of the things that I really like in Europe is the Innovative Health Initiative. Those are really public-private partnerships, so that in fact from the get-go, you have the right people at the table. You have the people that are non-profit, you have the people that are academic, and you have the companies at the table who buy into the concept. So that could be another model we could apply here.
I have one more to do, which is very important, I think. Insurance for children right now is under threat, and many of the targets of repurposing might be to meet unmet need in kids or people with rare disease who are young adults. Making sure that reimbursement stays in effect for these folks is absolutely critical, because again, without payment, there's no innovation.
So I see there is a few questions. Mark,
Why don't you do an
Hi, good morning. Ann Doyle, Trillium Advisors. Is there a role for Bidol walk-in or breach-through? Or they basically pulling back an invention that was funded through academia from NIH money and is sitting on the shelf?
I couldn't hear the question. Would you mind repeating your question?
Sure. Is there a role for a Bidol march-in for assets that were originally coming out of universities?
Hi, so I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about both Marchin and Section 1498. My view is that no, this is not the answer to that question for a lot of reasons. The key is to make this remunerative for companies who want to invest, investors who want to be in this space, and if the patent system or market exclusivities don't work, to find alternative ways to make sure that companies get their investment out of here. Thank you.
Can I add though, I think that a part of the exercise in setting this up is understanding the journey of a potential medicine into companies in the first place. And there may be an opportunity to figure out how to take unlicensed assets out of universities and other places that feed into the larger development platform to figure out how to get them. And I also want to put a complete wrench in the works, because we're talking about medicines, but this applies to diagnostics and to devices as well. If I think about focused ultrasound, or ultrasound, we used to think of it as an imaging, diagnostic, and now it's a therapeutic. So that repositioning or repurposing, and then I want to change the name from repositioning and repurposing to purposing.
Yeah,
Just plain purposing. we are taking
We're taking
things
purpose.
that
Yep,
are
love
not serving a purpose and making them do so.
Love it. I just want to make
Yep.
sure, Jane, I'm coming to you.
Hi, my name's Craig Martin. I'm CEO of the Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator, which is, Andrew, kind of what you described as Adopt a Drug. We're a nonprofit biotech. We take shelved programs, work with CDMO and CRO partners at a deferred cost basis. We're going to be announcing funding in some of those partnerships today. We've been building this for a year, and part of what we've learned is it's not hard to find the assets, actually. We've looked at 45 of them already, and oftentimes it's the patient groups that will come and bring them to you and say, hey, this program, we were just told it's not moving forward. My child is on this treatment. They're doing well. Can you help us? Other times, we have a number of people involved that are on boards of biotechs or have, been in industry for a long time, so they're aware of programs that have been abandoned or shelved. I think this notion of transparency is the key, and part of what we want to be able to do is to make those programs that we've looked at available along with the information that we've done and the work that we've done leveraging AI-based tools to vet them, so that somebody can look at an asset differently. Maybe it opens up those assets to family offices or donor-advised funds that would be intimidated normally. And then also open up this clinical development network that we've set up to others, so that a patient group might find it's affordable to complete the development of one of these shelved drugs and then help them to commercialize it directly. And I think the nonprofit component is key for the initial work that we do, and then we can spin out into for-profit. But with
you're gonna
leaders
be
like you
part of our
involved
movement.
providing guidance, I think we can get there a lot more quickly. So I'd love to be able
Welcome
to
to the movement.
sign me up.
Yes.
Jane,
Hi, Annette. Hi,
to see you.
Andrew. It's great to be back. I'm Jane Wilkinson at Can Collaborate, and we've been talking about repurposing molecules and assets, but there's a huge amount of unreported data out there. And I think we really should be thinking about how we're repurposing the data. And I think we've never really been able to wrap our arms around all of that until now, especially with the ever improving ML tools that we have. From a personal experience, I've been working with a brilliant caregiver. His wife has a rare cancer. And he's actually retrained himself as a scientist to try and pursue a cure, a repurposing cure for his wife. There are 6 clinical trials on clinicaltrials.gov that use that molecule, and not a single one of them have reported out their data. They're all closed, they're all completed, but there's nothing there. So is he about to start a whole new clinical trial to find out what those other 6 trials have already done and completely waste his time and his energy, and especially the time that he has left with his wife? So I think we need to think about repurposing data as well as the actual molecule and the actual assets.
Yeah, no, I'm completely in agreement with you. It's just that very often hospitals see themselves as businesses, and it's hard to get the data out, if I can be really honest. This is a hard battle.
So this is one of the reasons why funding is needed to create an organization and a clearinghouse. As Craig Martin mentioned, the data is there, and you can find out a lot of information just by asking. But it has to be somebody's job to do the asking. Everybody else in this room already has a day job, already has stuff going on. So what is it going to take to have them drop what they're doing, focus on this, knock on the doors of the 50 biggest pharma companies and ask them, what do you got? What can I take off your hands, and what can I sell on your behalf and be able to generate more revenue for you? It's as simple and as difficult as that. Somebody has to have the job to do that, and that's why you need the funding and to create the organization to do it. Once you do, I do believe that, as Craig pointed out, there will be a lot of comers, a lot of participants.
And then just to close, because we're getting kicked off the podium, You need champions. And I just hope that with this panel, you have been inspired, energized, and after this panel, there will be a lot more champions joining our movement to reposition, purpose, whatever we want to call it, as long as the drugs get to the patients. Thank you so much.
Thank you.